Hi, this is Nathan Tintle. In this Learning Goal video, we will talk about the shape of the null distribution when we use a math statistic. We will use the Coming to a Stop dataset from the Introduction to Statistical Investigations textbook. In this dataset, we can compute a value of 8.6% for the math statistic. Now, when we simulate the null distribution, we're simulating the hypothesis of no association, that is, that there's no differences in the proportions. As we think about the MAD statistic and its distribution when the null hypothesis is true, one of the key questions we have to ask is, can the MAD statistic be negative? And the answer is no. We're averaging positive numbers together, so the MAD statistic is always going to be positive. Remember, when we compared two proportions, the null distribution was bell-shaped, centered at 0, meaning that about half the time the value of the statistic was negative if the null hypothesis was true. That's not going to be the case here. So what is the shape going to look like? Well, the shape is going to be right skewed, always positive. And so it's almost like you've taken a bell-shaped curve centered at 0 and folded it over the y-axis. And you can see the distribution here where we've simulated 1,000 shuffles of the null hypothesis of no association between the type of car and whether or not it stopped. Couple of reminders. First, the MAD statistic is always positive, so the null distribution is always positive, and it ends up being right skewed. This is different than we've seen before where we had bell-shaped distributions often centered at 0. Second, you can think of this test like a built-in two-sided test. Why? Because you're taking the absolute value. It doesn't matter which group is bigger than the other. And so if you think of a two-sided test, you're sort of saying, well, it doesn't really matter which of these groups is bigger than the other. I just want to look for a difference. The MAD statistic is doing that inherently. So every time you use a MAD statistic, it's like you're doing a two-sided test. So when you're looking for your p-value with a MAD statistic, you're only going to be looking in the upper tail, even though it is, in theory, a two-sided test. We'll talk more about that in other Learning Goal videos.